go live button. So now we're live.
Oh, we weren't before? I got an announcement that we were live before you started the countdown.
Okay. Now we are, yeah. I had to press the go live button on YouTube, so
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I thought it had connected us because it was playing the sponsor at the beginning, but then I
Yeah.
realized when I refreshed my window, it hadn't actually fully connected, but now we are.
Oh, okay. Pablo has just indicated that he knows we're live
Yes. Yeah. This is why we start a little early too, to make sure everything's functioning smoothly.
because there have been days when it didn't function smoothly.
Yes, but we usually make it work, so that's good.
Incidentally, Emmy, my computer was giving me the pinwheel all the time when I was editing videos.
Oh.
So I contacted Apple and because I thought, well, I have an iMac, and now that we're using 4K videos, maybe the iMac's not powerful enough. And I talked to the people at Apple, and they said, well, maybe you need, our next biggest system, even more powerful than your iMac. He said, but before you do that, you should check and make sure that there aren't any problems with your existing computer. And I got online with a tech, and he cleaned the cache,
Uh-huh.
and the problem went away.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, maybe I need a little cleaning on my computer too. Okay.
It's in the folder, it's called libraries, and then there's a folder in there called cache. And he just deleted that folder. It recreates itself, and apparently it made a big difference.
Oh, well,
Doesn't that sometimes delete like save passwords you've got for different things and you have to re-log into things when you go back to them?
Well, see, there are different caches, and I
Right.
think that would be your browser stores that information.
Okay.
And its cache, I don't think it's the same one that is in the library folder, but to be honest, I'm not 100% sure.
yeah. And we're talking about an editing program, so that might, like you say, Jeff, maybe it's different. But yeah, I'll call them and
Uh,
get a little
If
cleaning.
you're getting that pinwheel all the time, just tech support can help.
Okay, good. So your videos are rendering less? Is that what it was doing? Was rendering, or was just kind of freezing your screen?
It was freezing. You get the pinwheel and you just have to wait, and it was happening constantly.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I haven't had that happen,
Yeah.
so okay.
Well, it was the first time, I think, and I've had this computer for about a year and a half now.
Yeah.
We've got some likes on Facebook. I think some people are joining us from there.
Oh, good. Yeah. And people are joining. I see hello from Costa Rica. Hello, Costa Rica. We've got Alsace, France. And somebody says Callum is an amazing guest who's chatting in on the live. Yeah.
Oh,
Live chat. That's so nice.
always nice to hear.
What's everyone on? I've got a massive cup of tea.
Oh, what a beautiful cup that
Oh,
is.
do you like that?
I do. I love teacups.
Yeah, yeah, lovely artwork.
There's yeah, flowers opening up on the other side.
Uh-huh.
So
Beautiful.
pretty. Birds of Paradise, tropical.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, beautiful. So Jeff, even just writing this down for what's actually syllabi that are already in or they're in the drafting, there's 6 already. I know there's other ones that need to be gotten around to after that. So it's making good progress. Back on them this next week. I'll
Yeah,
try
and
and
we
get
had
two more submitted.
you may have seen another student has enrolled or
Excellent. Yeah, I've
applied.
emailed a few.
Hmm.
That's really good.
Somebody's watching from Central Park in New York, and
Oh, wow.
hello from Wales.
I made it my mission last time I was in New York City to find the cheapest hot dog I could on the kind of ends of the streets. And I found one for 99 cents. So I felt like mission achieved. It was awful, really bad.
The cheapest, what though?
Hot dog.
Hot dog.
Yeah.
99 cent. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to find the cheapest one just out of interest as to who did the cheapest and what it tastes like.
Sometimes you get what you pay for, huh?
You really do. So my friend David, who's the head of psychology at the University of Northampton, also a parapsychologist, he specializes in lucid dreaming. He was just desperate to find a corn dog. He'd not really tried a proper New York corn dog, so I think he managed to achieve that. So that was done. Of course, when I get around to making some of the films, I want to get David interviewed. I can do that at Northampton. He was a
Excellent.
massive fan of Keith Hearn, and we had Keith Hearn come and speak to us a couple of times. And I always enjoyed Keith's company because he does a lot of classical music and piano and stuff like that. That's been his main income, besides when he was working as a psychologist. And he did his PhD at Lancaster, I think, where he discovered that during lucid dreams, he could get them to respond with their eye responses during the period of the lucid dream.
Do you
So,
know Christopher Robinson?
yeah, I know of him. I remember you interviewed him. We had him as a guest at the 2019 SPR conference talking
That's
about his
right.
dream
Now I
precognitions.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
Keith Hearn worked with him very intensely
Mm.
because that's what he did. He had lucid dreams of events that then came to pass.
Yeah,
Although,
I think that was following his heart attack in the 1980s.
Mhm.
Just had a complete change of, well, something changed, and then he started getting these.
Well, it seems to be also, in his case, it's another case of potential alien intervention.
Uh, I remember that the main things for us that he spoke about, I don't think he really went into any alien intervention, but it was more so how much interest the military and New Scotland Yard and the UK police took
There
interest
was
in.
that piece of it too, but he actually described for us on video an instance in which he was very ill and he had one of these lucid dreams where aliens came and operated on him. But then he had a surgery schedule and he showed up for the surgery and the surgeon was angry at him. The surgeon said, "You had this taken care of somewhere else. Why didn't you tell me?"
Mm, that's odd, isn't it?
Yeah. He said, "No, I didn't, but except, for in a dream."
Mm, mm. It's hard to know where to go with that, really, isn't it?
Well, there are multiple instances of this, quite a number, actually.
Oh, we're on the
I don't know, is in the UK, is there as much interest in UFOs as there is in the US? It's a very
Yeah, there are groups, and there's been like they call them paracons, like more public conferences of these UFO hunters and stuff. And there are folklore researchers like David Clark, who's at Sheffield Hallam University journalism department. He's fascinated with UFOs, and there's other people as well. So it hardly touches parapsychology. One of my PhD students, Ewan, I've allowed him to bring some UFO stuff into our parapsychology lecture, just one class about what is and isn't parapsychology.
uh-huh.
And so I threw in his direction the Rogo stuff as well, because there's some of that psi in the overlap.
Yes, I remember discussing it with your colleague, who was very opposed to parapsychologists looking at UFOs.
There's quite a few that feel that way.
I listen, Robert Morris dropped off of my dissertation committee for that reason.
Ah,
Yeah, he felt very strongly about it. I feel very strongly the other way that the evidence is getting more and more convincing that there is a very deep connection.
mm.
Oh, it's time to start, isn't it? We are live. Welcome everybody. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. I'm here with co-host Emmy Vadnais and our special guest today, Callum Cooper, who is a guest host on New Thinking Aloud and is also on the faculty of the Parapsychology program at the California Institute for Human Science. So we're going to be talking today about the current state of affairs in the field of parapsychology. Cal is the perfect person for such a discussion because he has been deeply immersed in the field. He is an parapsychology instructor at the University of Northampton in the UK, where he supervises about a dozen doctoral students writing their dissertations in this field. Welcome, Cal. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you both. It's lovely to see you both again, and thank you for having me.
I should also mention your several books, in particular, Telephone Calls from the Dead, a wonderful case study of people who actually have had conversations on the telephone with deceased friends and relatives. It's really amazing. It would be unbelievable, in fact, if it wasn't for the fact that D. Scott Rogo, my distant cousin, published an earlier book on the same subject a couple decades before you got involved.
Mm. His name, as it was, Douglas Scott Rogowski, if they'd not changed his name when he came over to the States or the family came over. But yeah, he really pushed the boundaries. I'm still working on his biography at the moment. It mainly exists in box files all over the place. But I've entitled it, the subtitle, the book is simply called Rogo, but it's the life and tragic death of an outspoken parapsychologist. He really wasn't afraid to kind of talk about topics that the others weren't, and partly because he was self-contained as well. He wasn't working particularly for the universities. He was on the faculty at John F. Kennedy University. He came as a visiting lecturer now and then, and also in California as well. But he supported himself, so he felt he could write on anything he liked, really. So broaching the telephone calls, I think, broke down some boundaries because they were just so common that people reported not just interactions with what they thought to be the dead, but strange experiences with the telephone in general that coincided with people having day-to-day telepathic experiences or ones related to bereavement as well. So he was opening up that floor to discussion, which I think was really needed.
Another thing that's worth talking about, since you are obviously in the UK, anybody who listens to you speak for a while will pick up on that. Uh, it does seem to be, I think, a fair statement that parapsychology education in the UK is much more advanced than here in the United States, where we're working very hard to build a degree granting program at the California Institute for Human Science, but there are probably a dozen universities in the UK that will supervise doctoral level students writing dissertations on parapsychological topics.
Yeah, I keep doing a head count now and then by just doing a Google search and looking at UK universities and writing parapsychology module, which in the United States we might call a unit or syllabus as well. It's just all the same thing, really, in terms of one of those topics you pick up as part of a bigger degree, all those different sections to make your full credit. And so often universities in the UK have had it as a third year option in a Bachelor of Science with honours for psychology. But there's been sociology that has taken it on. Some sections of physics and anthropology have taken it on as well. I was just thinking when I really kick-started the career, it's well over 20 years ago now for me that I was really wanting, besides performing arts, to get into psychology, but also tackle parapsychology through psychology because I knew it was there. It existed as a subcategory of psychology. And even then, I won't name the names, but there were kind of well-known parapsychologists I know now and deal with a lot and are good friends and colleagues, and I adore them, that I emailed them at the time and said, oh, don't bother. You know, it's career suicide, or get some degrees first that are in more general things, and then afterwards dabble with it outside of the PhD, or maybe incorporate a bit of it into your PhD, but get good grounding in research methods, get a good psychology degree that doesn't touch on this at all. I went completely against their advice. My undergraduate degree, I engaged with it as much as I could, even from the first year. My final year, I did the module. I did a dissertation on it, looking at remote staring detection in the field. So getting data for that. My master's degree, I was looking at creativity and belief systems in link with afterlife beliefs. So there was a little bit of an overlap. And then for my PhDs and beyond, I definitely dabbled with it. The second one was just pure parapsychology, looking at case study methodology and how robust it can be, and some of the strengths and weaknesses of day-to-day case studies and how we might analyze them as well. But I think from the last head count I did, there's at least 1 dozen universities in the UK that have a taught module with credit that's typically part of a psychology degree. And I made a list of them on my social media a while ago. And then there's a few beyond that that have someone there that had previously in their doctorate done some parapsychology or are known for parapsychology, and therefore you could go to that university to do a research degree, so a Masters of Philosophy, PhD, or other form of doctorate, and incorporate parapsychology into it. So I think in the last 20 years, I've seen massive changes in the field in terms of there's just more open acceptance for discussion of these things. I think New Thinking Aloud massively contributes to that, because the videos regularly become a suggestion for people. Go and watch, look, you've got the lecture there, you've got the interview there, you can see what this original figure from the field said. One of my favorite ones is your interviews with Sally Rhine Feather. I'm a massive fan of the Rhine legacy and what happened in the Rhine Revolution. I love teaching that aspect. And I say to my students, this is such a rare privilege to hear from Sally as to what went on in that kind of process. And we've still got little bits of footage here and there of Louisa Rhine and Joseph Banks Rhine as well. So yeah, I think we've come on leaps and bounds in the UK. And you both said at the start with how many doctoral students I'm supervising now at the University of Northampton alone. And, think of all the other universities doing this as well.
So probably, yeah, within another decade, there could easily be 100 doctoral dissertations, or maybe there already are.
I think we're already there. Professor Bernard Carr, who's a vice president of the Society for Psychical Research, he was one of Professor Stephen Hawking's students. He made a map of just UK doctorates alone. Again, about 20 years ago, he did it for the magazine of the SPR. And most of it was looking at the Bob Morris legacy. So Robert Morris came over from California. He won the interview place for the Koestler Chair at the University of Edinburgh. He became their professor of parapsychology. I think, was it late 1980s, Jeff? I think it was. 1980s was when he went over. And he saw about 32 to 34 PhDs under his name, mainly with parapsychology supervision in them. So that kick-started things off in many ways in terms of, look, he alone has supervised all of these. And where did they go? They were either went back to, if they visited the UK to do it, they went back to their countries and carried it on, or they stayed in the UK and went to other universities, like my supervisors, Professor Chris Rowe, Dr. Simon Sherwood, Professor Deborah Delanoy. Deborah Delanoy was supervised by John Beloff just before Robert Morris as well. So John Beloff had supervised 5 PhDs at Edinburgh. And we've got this big family tree. So because Bob supervised Chris supervised me, I'm a grandchild to Bob Morris. And then we start to get this incestuous crossover and things like that, because we've got some that were supervised by Bob. Bob passed away in 2004. Now they've come back and I'm supervising them. So it's a bit of a mishmash of that family tree now. But it is great. Look, talking about this legacy, it's so family orientated that someone knows someone in this field because it's so small. Everyone's got so much to talk about, and mutual respect for what they're doing and what the journey is like, and all the kinds of just experiences of not just working in parapsychology, but what it's like to work in academia and deal with science data, and what it's like to put papers together and go to conferences. So yeah, that legacy, I think, has really served us well in the UK. It's told a really, really nice story. But I've always kept my eye on particularly the USA and how that's changed over time, from what happened at Duke University to then, there's your own story, Jeff, in California. There's also the John F. Kennedy program, John F. Kennedy University program. And then since then, we've had Atlantic University and things like that have, put some parapsychology on the map. So I think it's coming up again in the USA. I think we're raising it up the academic ladder.
I hope so, but I think it's fair to say parapsychology is no longer being taught to my knowledge, at Atlantic University or at John F. Kennedy University in the United States. I know back in the 1970s, when I was a graduate student, there might have been many dozen courses in parapsychology that were being offered. It was beginning to be a popular topic, even for undergraduate students. I think today that's kind of all vanished for the most part. The popularity of parapsychology courses got stamped out, I think, by the hostile
Mm.
response of the scoffers. Uh, Whereas in the UK, it seems to me you had a tradition where I think, society in the UK is much more class oriented than it is in the US. And you had people like Arthur Balfour, the Prime Minister, who was a member of the Society for Psychical Research, and his brother and sister both were presidents.
Mm. Oh, well, he was president briefly. He did have presidency for a
Oh,
bit, so
okay.
that was also really good that we had a past prime minister that was president.
Yeah.
But yes, that was all kind of family orientated as well. And then we've got Nobel laureates and things like that that have been involved even to this day as well. Brian Josephson as well.
Yeah.
So he's still very much a member and still very much active.
Mhm.
So yeah, we've got a really powerful history over here. You've just reminded me, Jeff, in terms of any hostility that is brought up against academia and things like this. I rewatched one of your interviews with our good friend Stan Krippner, Professor Stanley Krippner, and it was on skepticism in parapsychology. And I'd read it in the Rhine biography, The Enchanted Voyager, it's called. So it's the biography to J.B. Rhine. And Stan mentions it as well, where when Stan was a student, he was on a student panel for psychology, and he was arranging guest lecturers to come in, and he wanted JB Rhine to come and give a talk. And the senior academics that the students had to go to approve this and get the money for their travel and accommodation refused it. There was a couple on the panel that had really bad things to say about Rhine, and didn't like his methodology or highly questioned the outcomes of what was being produced at Duke University. And so there's a back and forth, but a lot of people wanting him to come and talk. So I think Stan had gone back to JB and said, look, since you really want me to come, don't worry about the pay. If you can organize that I'm going to have a talk there, then I'll just come. And he did. And
Hmm.
Stan said at that time, for that community and what was happening in the evenings, there was a really popular show on at the theatre that, a lot of people wanted to go and see. But there was packed out 1,000 seats in this massive US auditorium. And people sat on the seats because there was no chairs left watching Ryan. And even these people on the panel that had had nothing but bad things to say about him sat through the whole thing, did not challenge him in it. And I think they went up and respectfully spoke to him afterwards as well. And it was the best talk that even Stan had ever seen JB give. He said it was very compelling towards the evidence that they produced. I love these stories where you've got just an initial idea, where you've got an idea of a reputation or how you feel about the topic. And if you shut it down without giving it a chance, well, then you'll never know. And just allowing him to have that platform to talk, have your say, it created good debate. It opened up ideas. That room must be full of absolute cynics, skeptics, believers, had no idea about the field as well, mishmash of all kinds of people from all different backgrounds. And it seems like everyone had a really good evening. And that was a nice boom milestone in the journey of what Ryan was doing and Stan's career and everyone else's, and also how that faculty felt about initially saying no. Maybe it stopped them doing such things in future and saying, actually, yeah, okay, let's hear them out.
Well, Stan and I, it turns out, both went to the same college for our undergraduate years, the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Of course, he was older than I am by about 10 or 15 years. And by the time I got there, there was no interest whatsoever in parapsychology. The big Midwestern universities were all very oriented towards the behaviorist model, and even consciousness, even a discussion of consciousness back in the 1960s when I was an undergraduate student was almost entirely forbidden. Even Freud and was not part of the curriculum.
Mm. Well, one of my universities that I went to, um, they knew nothing of parapsychology.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that they didn't teach it; they didn't know about it really. They had a vague idea as to what it was about, and it really surprises people when you just give one introductory kind of talk. as the amount of research methodology that it started to kickstart in social sciences in general, especially back to the Rhine era, about, well, let's look at testing things in terms of probability theory, when they were using the Zener cards. And that's now a very common thing for social sciences, about testing things against the p-value of 0.05. It's a standard thing that we test most tests against. Rhine was using higher initially at 0.005. Now that's a really, that's a big feat to achieve when you're doing any study, let alone ESP, but it shows how good some of that initial data was. Then there was shielding from the targets, randomization, and then later on we get all kinds of things coming in, that the lab-based studies, free response methodology, how to calculate that and turn it into data and number cruncher, everything Chuck Honiton was doing, and how popular meta-analyses became. So you see all of these really good things and ideas being pushed, and things we should be wary of in methodology. I even praised Dr. Richard Broughton. I've been talking about his book, Parapsychology, the Controversial Science, a lot recently, because I've been really pushing Richard to try and write some more chapters. I said, your career did not stop in 1991. Put more in, please put more in. It's such a good book. But he gave a presidential letter to the SPR a few years ago, just at the end of his presidency, talking about the experimenter effect that applies to all kinds of research. And parapsychology has been fully aware of that as an issue since at least the 1920s. I think Carlos Alvarado had pointed it out as an issue even before then. People were noticing in some of historical overviews that he did when he really digged into the literature. So that's really exciting about all these things that it discovered, parapsychology. And when people say it's made no milestones, it certainly has. You've seen how it's trickled into other areas of social science and wider science as well. And, it might be a case of, well, we'll have that. That's great, but we don't like you. Well, still, I invented it. You've taken it.
Cal, we have a question here related to what you've been discussing from one of our regular viewers, Andrei Slavash-Krasowski, who
Hi, Andre.
asks, what is your opinion about possible applications of mathematics to the theory of psi? I mean, these phenomena are very elusive, but on the other hand, some may feel that there is something to be found.
Well, I'm not a statistician. When it comes to psychology, I mainly deal with qualitative information. So I'm doing the interviews and I'm analyzing written script. But I've dealt with quantification and dealing with psi studies. I've done dream telepathy studies. We're working on remote viewing of the flotation tanks. When I did staring detection, it's a very kind of basic social science quantitative approach of summing up, where we use what's called chi-square, where in this chi-square, we've got 4 possible outcomes of someone staring and the person got it right or wrong, or someone's not staring and they got it right or wrong. So you've got numbers there to look at that are 4 possible directions. So when you do a chi-square, it looks at any differences between the possible outcomes. Go back to Rhine and the 1920s through to the 1930s, as they start to establish what's called forced choice data. You've got 5 possible outcomes of the star, the cross, the wavy line, the circle, and the square. 5 in every pack. And so 25 to a pack, chances of guessing are 5 out of 25. So there we're bringing in some early statistics of chance. A standard deviation, so what chance still allows, is 1 out of that. So 6 is still within chance. When you start to push above 7, 8, 9, and it's getting consistent, then we're looking at something that's going beyond what chance expects. You will even get taught in schools probability theory based on coin tosses and things like that, about how do we understand what we mean by the probability of something. So when you know that something is pushing beyond what we understand of how chance works and what chance expects, and we've put barriers in place, I mentioned the shielding, the randomization and so forth, to stop people knowing a pattern, gaining access to the data in some way, or it being leaked in and they're unconsciously picking up on it. If you put barriers in place to stop that, and you're still getting a statistically significant outcome, well, that's how we're quantifying ESP or psi data, because the numbers are saying you are still gaining access to something via what seems to be telepathy or clairvoyance or precognition, but there is nothing in place to allow you any conventional sensory access to that data. So then when it comes to the free response, we're doing it on a much bigger scale, where we're taking people's dreams and we're looking at the chance against possible video clips and all sorts. So even though I don't particularly deal with statistics, my colleagues, especially my mentor, Professor Chris Rowe, forever, I always turn to him for stats advice. You know, it's one of the main things that Ryan was asked to do as a complete demand to gain scientific recognition for parapsychology. We need recognition as a science, so making a standard methodology for testing ESP and PK. A lot of the PK stuff was dice rolling and cages spinning with the drop of a dice and trying to will them or predict them. And it is quantifying a real world scenario and trying to narrow it down. But it was very forced choice. So the criticisms that were day to day, we're not talking about squares and crosses and wavy lines. Day to day psi experiences seem to be anything. So we need to incorporate how people have any kind of experience into a lab scenario. So that's why the dreams and allowing people to say anything in a flotation tank or the Ganzfeld. How do you quantify something that's free response? And you can do that as well. But in some ways, it shows when judges come in and so forth, these statistics are pushing beyond chance. So what other mechanisms are in play that we haven't accounted for that is making this happen if it is not psi? So that's why statistics are really useful. In other instances, you've just got the really good accounts and the case studies. Look, this is really compelling and we can't find a conventional explanation. So the other side is test it in the lab.
Well, I think that Andre, and I have to speak for him, maybe wasn't thinking about statistics, but
Oh,
mathematics in general. I mean, I know here in the US, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but we have separate departments for statistics and mathematics, even though statistics is obviously a branch of mathematics. But there are other branches of mathematics that are relevant to most fields of science, even, for example, the area of psychophysics, where you ask yourself if I increase the magnitude of a stimulus, if I double the stimulus and make it, let's say, a sound twice as loud, what is the subjective experience? Is there a correlation between changing a physical parameter and how it impacts the psychological experience? For example, depth of hypnosis, is that correlated to psychic functioning? Could we come up with a law, a mathematical law that might frame such a relationship? That would, I think, put parapsychology on a more scientific footing if there were relationships like that that could be quantified.
yeah, that would push even further for having working models and theories for how things are operating when we're starting to find those relationships even more. So again, I can't comment for the statisticians as I'm not one, but I know they've been very handy to the field. Jessica Utz, for example, who was the previous president of the American Statistical Association, she's made massive contributions by being a numbers expert. And we've even had people pushing boundaries like, again, Stan. Stan sent me some early papers for him dabbling with dream telepathy and dream precognition and chaos theory. So
Mhm.
chaos mathematics and looking at probability in complex systems. So I dabbled with talking about that with spontaneous cases when I was working on my second doctorate about, could chaos theory and mathematics contribute to spontaneous cases? We use them to predict weather cycles. So if there are any kind of patterns or cycles to when people are most likely to have these experiences, could chaos actually contribute to that? People have even looked at weather cycles anyway and their relationship to anomalous experiences like electrical storms, or even things like geomagnetic activity as well, when there are explosions on the surface of the sun and how those rays come down to Earth and how they seem to impact on people, or phases of the moon as well. That's been a big thing. So, yeah, I'm with you, Andre. I think it's a good relationship to have with the statisticians, but that's as far as I think I can contribute to it.
And there's probably mathematical representations that could explain, if you will, all of this that maybe has not been formulated, pun intended, in a way that might be satisfactory for people, meaning that we can look at our experiences through many lenses and that there might be mathematical, for example, equations that might explain all of this. I'd be I know this is your both of your and mine one of our favorite topics, parapsychology. There may be people who are listening who don't actually know what that term means, and I'm wondering if we can just define what that is for people who are new, and why is it so important to research this topic?
Shall I go? Shall I do it?
You first, you're the guest.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I'm sure Jeff will chime in if he would like.
Parapsychology is often termed as the science of anomalous experiences and or abilities, which in principle seem to be outside of the realms of conventional scientific paradigms. So it's that area of psychology that deals with experiences where we don't have working models for them. They don't seem to fit with what we know. And they are things such as ESP, which was coined by Joseph Banks Ryan that we mentioned. So extrasensory perception, that would deal with experiences of telepathy, a seemingly mind-to-mind interaction, clairvoyance, a seeing of information at distance, precognition, a gut reaction feeling to something that you act upon and it turns out to be right, or a distinct vision of something before it happens. Then area 2, PK, psychokinesis or telekinesis, influencing the environment or people with your mind alone, spoon bending, metal bending, influencing biological systems, things like that, changing someone's heart rate or making them feel sick, or again, staring detection. Can you stare at the back of someone's head and they sense this danger and the need to turn around and scan their environment? And then survival. So anything that suggests that personality or maybe even consciousness is operating outside of the body, out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, through to permanent bodily death. So mediumship, apparitions, poltergeist, haunting, reincarnation type experiences. So parapsychology is just dealing with things that just currently seem to go beyond. And there are a lot of things that we call it anomalistic psychology as well, this branch of psychology that looks at all these conventional things we are aware of that make people feel that they are having a strange experience, when in fact we do seem to have a good working model for why they think they are. But parapsychology takes that into consideration and says, however, there are some instances here that don't seem to fit that. It just doesn't seem to work that way. So what's going on in these cases? It likes to take those with a question mark on and push them a little bit further and see what we can do with those instances. So that's a definition of parapsychology.
Thank you for that, Cal. And I just want to add that for our regular viewers, of course, these are the topics we cover on New Thinking Aloud. Yeah. Jeff, I imagine you have something to add.
Well, I like to think of parapsychology as an ancient tradition that goes back even thousands of years. In fact, we know that parapsychological types of experiments were conducted in ancient Greece,
Mm.
for example, and that there's a connection between parapsychology and traditions like yoga and shamanism and spiritism, mediumship, things of that sort. That's my vision for parapsychology. It's a little larger than just saying the Rhinian approach, which is looks at parapsychology as a branch of experimental psychology. I think that's perfectly valid as far as it goes, but I like to think that in addition to the experimental and research side, there's a practical side, that people who want to cultivate psychic abilities and apply them in different areas, ranging from healing to law enforcement to anthropological and archaeological research, that those are also within the broad tent of parapsychology as I envision it, including even subjects like UFOs. And I can tell you, there are parapsychologists who I respect, but they feel that parapsychology should not entertain these other subjects, that it's hard enough being a fringe science, just doing the experimental card guessing types of research, and that if we range too far afield into other areas, let's say cryptozoology, looking at Bigfoot, or ufology, looking at aerial phenomenon that seem to be associated with a wide range of paranormal phenomenon, that we're just jumping into a hole from which we'll never be able to dig ourselves out. I tend to disagree. I tend to think that we'll never understand the phenomenon, the simple things like telepathy and clairvoyance, if we don't look at this broader picture. But the good news, I suppose, is that there's room in this field for many different approaches.
Yeah, and also after death communication, I think Cal, you mentioned that. And my understanding with some recent research I looked at is that oftentimes people will come to this because they've had a personal experience that they can't explain. And that, for example, one of the common areas I understand is that people can have a precognitive dream, which happened to me. And of course, shared death experiences, and that these are perhaps even normal experiences that people have rather than it being fringe. However, there does seem to be some friction that does keep it on the fringes where, from my estimation, it's quite normal and natural. I don't know if you two would agree with that, but that's what it seems. It's quite common.
Yeah, again, watching that video back with Jeffrey and Stan this weekend, Stan brought it up. I hate the terms paranormal and supernatural. I think they come with all the media baggage and novelizations, and I've even seen newspapers before liken parapsychology to Jedi abilities, which, well, that's great, you know, it's getting some popular attention, but it's not the kind of attention we really want. That's not what we're talking about. We don't have lightsabers, and we're not talking about, you know, distant galaxies far, far away. We're talking about the here and now and the day-to-day experiences, and certainly not the extravagant ones where people say, well, if you're studying psychic phenomena or psychics, someone would have won the lottery by now doing this. Well, no one's ever really reported that. You know, it's really mundane stuff sometimes that people are reporting, but it's interesting as to how they've had one set of information that they're not sure where it's come from, and it's linked up to something else so perfectly, and we can translate that through to the lab and turn it into a study. But supernatural, beyond the natural, and paranormal, it's beyond the normal. Well, no, you know, it's happening day to day. There must be some working mechanism for it. Most of the time, it is going to be an anomalistic psychological thing. I've always found that there is something going on where people have misunderstood the experience they're having. And that's been demonstrated in studies like Hampton Court Palace, when Richard Wiseman and Kieran O'Keefe and others, Paul Stevens, that they all went there, and they split up skeptics and believers and just looked at how they interpreted their experiences, and whether they were just quick to jump the gun and jump straight to a paranormal experience if they were believers, and whether skeptics might systematically work their way through what's going on. You know, you can see how humans are operating in terms of whether they're more happy to jump to that mystical, oh, this was very exciting experience, or whether they want an explanation that fits within what they know. And this is great, but parapsychology is dealing with that. But we want to take those extra ones that where we don't seem to have an explanation and push them forwards. They are perfectly normal because people are having them day to day. It's just that there are a select few we don't have a working mechanism for. When I'm really struggling with explaining parapsychology to people in terms of how it even has a status as a science, I say, well, look at every other science. The whole point of science is they're dealing with a field that they've already established. It's got working labels and mechanisms and methods that they all know to actually train other people in that discipline. So certainly like psychology, but it's dealing with the next step. And I try and take the extreme and say, well, look at oncology research, people that are dealing with cancer and their patients that work in the hospital and caring for these people. They're in the labs testing out new medicine. They're looking for the next step. Yes, we've cured people of cancer in various instances, and common ones, things like breast cancer and testicular cancer and things like that, we've cured people of that, but not every instance. And there are some that get very aggressive as well. But the whole point that oncology keeps going is because we want to improve treatment, what we want to improve medicine as well. Psychology does the same. We've got loads of things we understand, but there are areas that are just not filled in yet. And every science is trying to complete a jigsaw that expands, the picture keeps expanding as we continue to have missing pieces. And so our job is to constantly fill in those gaps. And just this niche here, parapsychology of psychology, is looking at what we already know. We know how people talk about a telepathic experience. We could make one up as an example. We know it that well. You know, John had this experience with David, and they were both out, and one was in the supermarket, and the other one thought of this person, thought they'd broken their arm, and he had. We know what we mean by it, but we're trying to see, is something going on that we don't understand, or does it fit with what we already do understand? And we're just pushing those boundaries and trying to fill in gaps.
Yeah. Thank
We
you.
have a question from a viewer named Salman Zafar, who asks, can you comment on the effect of psychedelics on remote viewing and ESP performance? Some studies say they improve performance, and he's referring to the work of the late Jean Millay. You may not know, Cal, who was in California, a dear friend of mine.
All I could comment on would be David Luke over here. And I really don't know his, I've sat in on many of his lectures, and what I've seen, particularly his work with ayahuasca, and precognition-based studies, they were having some really interesting positive effects. John Lilly as well with the flotation tanks. We're working on them now for remote viewing, but not with psychedelics. But even in his early experimentation, he was using things like LSD and ketamine to look at consciousness research inside the flotation tanks. Admittedly, not with ESP, but he did propose that parapsychology should. In 1969, he said you could set up a sender-receiver scenario with the flotation tanks. But from my very basic knowledge of the psychedelics research, there's been some very positive outcomes. Also, Eileen Garrett, I've got just down there. You can see just a little, there's a canvas over there. I've got Rogo and Tanis down there, but there's Eileen Garrett. And inside the Parapsychology Foundation, when it was based in New York City, so in their early days, so 1950s, it was founded in 1951, they kept LSD in the safe in there for experiments that were conducted when researchers came in who were trained to use such psychedelics and carry out clinical trials. Mediums, placing mediums on things like that. Even Ryan was using sodium amytal when it came to the early studies that we're doing at the Rhine. They were trying all sorts of things, even caffeine. You know, does caffeine actually change you in an ESP study when you're given such a stimulant as that? There's some really interesting outcomes. And I think by the 1940s, Ryan got a table of different things you could ingest, more food-based substances, to see what differences it would have on people. My more kind of familiar link to that now is with Dr. Mike Dorr, one of my successful PhD students. He's passed. He's now Dr. Dorr. You interviewed him, Jeff, because he was looking at diet and ESP, and he tested people with any diet, fasting, vegetarianism, and veganism. And just an initial study, this PhD alone is an initial study because no one had looked at diet at those kinds of lengths. And there are initial results there suggesting that different dietary-based practices and ingesting different things does seem to relate to different day-to-day experiences and potentially performance in the Ganzfeld. That's right now going to a next step because for his Ganzfeld, he had 40 participants. We might be pushing that up to 80. Which is kind of more typical from a power calculation to have 80 participants into it, just to see where that's actually going next. But psychedelics, back to that main question, I don't know enough to really kind of say what were the best studies and which weren't, and that I'd have to go away and look. We need David Luke here, or Jeff, you've had far more experience than I in interviewing kind of the biggest people in that area.
Well, there is a new book out, and we did do an interview with Sean McNamara. He called his book, if I recall correctly, The Puharich Project, a tip of the hat to Andrea Puharich, who wrote the book, The Sacred Mushroom, and was very interested in the use of psilocybin and also Amanita muscaria to see if they would augment ESP performance. And in fact, Puharich was on a TV show, a very popular TV show. The name escapes me at the moment, is from the 1960s. And they show him going to Mexico, taking psilocybin with a shaman. And the host of the TV show was administered psilocybin as well by Puharich and given an ESP test on camera. So this has been going on, since we're talking the 1960s, if not earlier. What Sean McNamara found in his study, he gave psilocybin to a group of people and tested them for ESP recently, and they did well. But then he tested them again without the psilocybin. They did well as without. So he couldn't say there was a difference.
Yeah, and maybe because of the laws around those types of substances, the research isn't as robust as one may want at the moment.
Well, there are lots of problems in terms of the human factors, and administering substances like that are very tightly controlled. Sean McNamara's research was done independently of any university or supervising structure with private volunteers. And so he didn't go through any of those procedures, but he is he has a clinical license of some sort, I think a master's degree in counseling. So I'm sure he was treating the people he worked with professionally but he was able to avoid all of the various supervisory committees that would normally watch over research of that type.
Have either of you come across parapsychology research that looks at the experiences people have in relationship to what is meaningful to them? Does that impact? Because when I hear these stories, it's usually like Jeff with your Uncle Harry coming and visiting you at the time of his passing. I mean, there seems to be some meaning involved.
It's mostly at the level of folklore, I suppose, that uh, people report that psychic functioning works best when there's a need, when
Mm.
Mm.
when something of human needs are being fulfilled in one way or another. And a lot of research studies, card guessing studies, dice throwing studies, and the equivalent of such studies using computers uh, don't necessarily satisfy any particular human need, and so people theorize for that reason that the significant results, which are statistically significant but also very weak, uh,
Mm.
typically reported in laboratories, seem to be quite a contrast with the anecdotal reports of real life psi, which can sometimes be, like being struck by lightning. They can be quite amazing,
Like life changing, right?
life, life changing, but you don't normally get life changing experiences in the laboratory.
Yeah, because Cal, I'm curious. Yeah, thank you for that, Jeff. Cal, what do you want to say about
Well,
that?
yeah, I mean, what you at least do get in the laboratory is either good rapport. If you've got really good rapport with the person taking you through, they found even in general psychology studies, if the person meeting and greeting you says, would you like a cup of tea or coffee? And you've got a hot drink as opposed to a cold glass of water, the reputation, that researcher has got, that this is a known notorious media skeptic versus this person doesn't do the media very much, but they're, really well known for this area of research and they're very friendly and approachable. That's a big thing. But need serving, as Jeff said, when it matters to you, there seems to be better outcomes as well. And so also when there's a reward system in place, people also seem to do well. And this was an important thing back for Ryan again, novel stimuli. But the problem was with the Xena cards, it got boring over time. It's novel in the first instance. My students, by the time they've done 100 cards, have had enough. Because they realize it's just so repetitive, but it's fun and you're having a laugh initially when you're just trying it out and it's completely informal, but you need it to be engaging. So when you're trying to achieve certain things, there's a monetary outcome. Even David Luke, and I know there are other researchers besides, they'd done some precognition based computer tasks where some of your reward system as you went along was pornography, and you'd selected what was your kind of preferences, versus if you were doing badly as you went along through the computer sequence and you weren't getting an outcome in favor of psi, you would get a boring mathematical calculation that you had to figure out to get to the next step. So you were kind of getting something that would be a negative response to what you're doing as well. So the
Shows how
positive
it shows the relationship people have to math.
sooner look at the porn, please. I'm going to do far better here. And a positive reinforcement, being told, you've really got this, you're going to enjoy it, and I'm so glad you're taking part. When it matters and you've got good rapport, you seem to get good outcomes. There are some flukes in that, where Jeff is probably very familiar with this, has probably met some people that would like it, but I certainly know that from reading Sue Blackmore's autobiography, Parapsychologist in Search of the Light, and also John Beloff, that now they were slightly different people. Sue talks about her becoming increasingly skeptical throughout her career, whereas John was very supportive of psi and I think maintained his kind of mindset towards it throughout. But both known for when they started to do some of these studies at points, entering the room, particularly John, the studies would drop. And I know a couple of colleagues who are very pro psi, and yet the moment they start to get involved, it plummets. Something about them, even though they're very positive people and they want a good outcome, something about their presence just isn't helping the psi. So you've got these side jinxes as well, which I think that there's a paper to be had there about side jinxes,
Well, and
but
also,
generally positive rapport.
yeah, positive rapport, and also the researcher's consciousness, like desires, their wishes for a potential outcome, doesn't that all that can impact the research as well?
I think that goes back to the experimenter effect as well. That's really
Experimenter effect.
interesting.
Yes, yes, yes. Let's talk. Can we talk about that for a moment? Because I think that's fascinating. How, yeah, I know Jeff has talked about this, and Cal, whatever you want to say about that for people who might be new to what that means.
Well, the suggestion of that is we've got all of our controls in place again to try and stop sensory leakage or anyone gaining access to the targets, the actual outcome they're trying to pick up on in an ESP-based task. And if we talk about it in any kind of psychology or social science study, it's this idea that the experimenter, their attitudes, their biases, their expectations, somehow their interaction in the study and with participants is influencing in some way the outcome, even though they've not said it, even though they've perhaps not hinted at it, but in some way them observing has changed the outcome. That principle, do they call it the Heisenberg principle in terms of the nature side of things, where it comes to observation of nature and like wildlife documentaries? When you start to get involved in the environment and be there as an observer, it's changed as opposed to it naturally occurring and playing out. So the very fact you are there has changed the outcome as opposed to how it would naturally play. So the experimenter effect is like that. And people have questioned it when it comes to researchers that are very known for being pro-sci and very known for being skeptics, public skeptics, or thinking something else must be going on, but I'm happy to entertain a sci task and do it, and getting completely opposing results. So this has really been interesting for parapsychology, but it's been known for decades. Even in that Rhine era, that early Duke University stuff, it was becoming more and more of a common thing that people are aware of, and trying to see if there's a way of kind of ruling that out. There's a number of studies like Ganzfeld where if someone is in the Ganzfeld and they're laid down in this reclining chair with ping pong balls on their eyes, half shields, red light beaming down, that once they're there relaxing and they hear the white noise through their headphones for an hour, most of the time it's all via an intercom system. So no one sat next to them taking notes. Sometimes they are, but trying to just let them do their own thing and just record everything. And it's the transcripts, those mentations later that are important, trying to step away from letting the participant do their own thing. When you think of those early psychology studies, when you've got two-way mirrors and they're in a room trying to do a task that's timed, they know they're being watched. This isn't normal. This isn't natural. So, this is a controlled experiment, but we call it ecological validity. It doesn't have ecological validity here, and you're being observed, which changes the outcomes massively. That's why field studies can be really important, but you still have a bit of an effect there with the fact that you're in the environment observing. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what experimenter effect is. Observation and involvement in some small way typically is changing the ultimate outcome.
Yeah, their consciousness or their presence or something. Yeah. Jeff.
We have a question from Pablo Giralda, who's one of our volunteers. Pablo is in Argentina,
Hey, Pablo.
and he asked, Cal, did you have a personal paranormal experience that made you interested in this topic?
Great question, Pablo.
And incidentally, while I'm at it, there's a similar question from Cherry Rathman, who asks, Cal, as a parapsychologist, do you believe consciousness survives death?
Okay.
Okay, so the first one on experiences, my interest in getting into the field came through no experiences at all. I was already interested in reading on books on the paranormal when I was at school. I had very small class size. There was 11 people in my class at school. It wasn't a very big school. And so I was one of 4 or 5 other boys in my class. And whenever we went to the local library once a week with school, just went to the section and read on books on the paranormal. And there was cryptozoology there, Loch Ness Monster, the Bigfoot, as Jeff mentioned, and large cats roaming the countryside. But then it got me interested in Jeff the Talking Mongoose, which Harry Price investigated on the Isle of Man, and Borley Rectory in Essex, which was known as the most haunted house in England. I discovered Harry Price, this psychical investigator in London. And that material had already interested me, but there were very small, tiny books, just laminated and stapled by a local writer called Jane Peters, and she documented ghost stories locally and had just gone and interviewed people. And I thought this was fascinating because I knew these places. It's local, it's close to home, it's personable, and I thought this is great. These people all seem very honest and sincere about their experiences. and they're just retelling them. I think that makes the most captivating story, of just retelling a day-to-day experience that doesn't seem to have a conventional explanation to it. So that's what fascinated me. Becoming more aware of what these experiences are like, it's only in hindsight I remember one of the most distinct experiences I had, probably a few years later. I was about 13, something like that, 12, 13, and I'd already read these books. I'd already started to understand there was some sort of science to this field, and not really discovered the term parapsychology then. But I had had a dream about being stood in a queue with my mother, and it was like the room wasn't overly well lit. It was lit, but the lights were down a little bit. And there was lots of people just going back and forth. You know, when you've got like at the airports, when you come through immigration, they've got all the tapered ropes and stuff like that, and the poles, and you've got to go back and forth. You're in a queuing system, like at a fairground as well, or some sort of theme park. And I'm with her in that kind of scenario, and I'm slightly looking up to her because she's taller at the time, and I'm chatting to her. And I look at the front of the queue, and there's these black London taxi cabs cut in half. It's like in the film Herbie when it gets cut in half and it's going off on its own. It's just the back half, loads of them, not the front. And I thought, oh, that's strange. I wake up and I think that's a really weird dream. It's not contributed to anything. It's just a wacky dream that you might have. And sometimes they stick with you for a couple of hours afterwards and then you've forgotten about them. And that's what happened with that. And it's only when you keep a dream diary you can reflect and remember such things. Most of the time I'll have a good dream like that and then it's gone after a couple of hours. So a couple of weeks later, we go to London. And my mum, she was a serving midwife in the area for 40 years. And we went with one of her other retired, oh no, she was still working midwife at the time, and her son. And we go to London and we decide to go to Madame Tussauds, the waxwork museum. So all famous celebrities and figures from history and waxwork. But the quickest way to get in is to do the planetarium first. So we do that, joint tickets, we do the planetarium, all great. Leads us through to Madame Tussauds, and we do that. We do the Chamber of Horrors, we've seen royalty, everything. And then there's an option to do one extra bit. So you've got 3 kind of elements to this instead of 2. Do you want to do one extra bit of the tour? So we say yes. And we've got to go and queue up. And all of a sudden, when I'm at the right point at the right time, talking to my mum, boom, it goes back to the dream. I'm stood in the queue and we're waiting for a ride. That's the last bit of the tour. And I'm talking to my mom, and it's only at that point of talking to her, it makes me like deja vu, go, oh my God, I've been here before. It's the dream. And what are we about to sit in? What's the ride? Well, you're going to go around an exhibition of waxworks, and the ride is the back part of a London taxi cab. And there's this row of black London taxi cabs, just one after another. I'd never seen any posters, never seen any advertising or trailers for anything like this. I didn't know anything about Madame Tussauds. You know, some people could say, well, that's cryptomnesia. You know, somehow you've gained access to it and forgotten about it and it's come back. I very much doubt it. And then there's the question of, if you're going to put that explanation forward, how could you test that and demonstrate that to be true? So that for me was an interesting, it didn't matter so much to me. It was a lovely trip and it was a nice memory with my mum to go down. Didn't save my life in any way and it didn't really contribute, but it was very distinct. So with that, and Keith Hearn, in his book, he mentions an experience he had on a ferry, I think. That was the thing that got him really interested in precognition, that starts off his book, Visions of the Future. But yeah, my interest in parapsychology did not come from an experience. I'd had like a few things where I recognized them later, but I don't think they were really life-changing at all. It was just oh, that's what they're like. Okay. So do I believe in life after death? Is that how it's worded? Is the next
That's
question.
how it's worded. As a parapsychologist, do you believe consciousness survives death?
So I was part of the Bigelow essays, which, if people here are regular subscribers to New Thinking Aloud, it'll be no surprise that Jeff is the winner of that. And we were there. We were out in Las Vegas, and I was involved. I did an essay as well, so I've dabbled with the literature a lot. Is what really got me interested in parapsychology. I'm more of a survival interest than doing the ESP and PK studies, but I'm involved in a lot of different things. But I'm also chair now of the Survival Research Committee for the Society for Psychical Research, which was founded in 1882. So as chair of the Survival Committee, we deal with grants, research grants, applications for money coming in for projects on survival. And I've seen many over time, and a lot of my literature, especially downstairs and upstairs, is all survival geared. These are all general journals from Fate magazine and Proceedings of the SPR and American SPR. I've dealt with so much of the literature, And when I did my essay, I was tasked with dealing with deathbed visions and hauntings. And I had to go and find the best evidence within those, within the time that we had to write the essay, because I'm sure there'd be better cases besides the ones I found that would suggest that there's something leaning towards consciousness operating beyond death, because the apparition seems to be interactive, it's aware of people, it's got knowledge of that deceased person, and so on. Or the people on the deathbed are seeing people they don't know to be dead as they're dying, and they describe them with incredible detail. They deliver information to the dying person that they shouldn't know about, or the people around the deathbed see this as well and they hear it. And so I gave examples of that. Really, really compelling. As a psychologist and parapsychologist, I personally struggle with the idea that after death we are conscious and we're surviving. I'm not going to say no, because I've done this essay competition. I've seen the literature. I've seen the really compelling accounts. The data and the accounts exist. And, studies that would favor or support this idea, like, studies into out of body experiences. And could you detect someone traveling at another place, like Alex Tannis's studies? He was tested for out of body experience abilities. And could he detect something in another room? Could he go to another room and could they detect him there in some way with strain gauges? And there's all things like Faraday and weighing the body on the weighing scale bed as it's dying to see if anything additional leaves from the weight gain and weight loss. So yeah, I'm more in favor of this idea. I like the title of Myers's book, Frederick Myers, Human Personality and Its Survival of Bodily Death, in 1903, which he never saw to completion. He died in 1901. But it's that aspect for me that I think is compelling, especially because of reincarnation experiences and children having knowledge of previous families, having skills like piano, classic piano playing, or some sort of skills to do with their hands, or something that they can do instantaneously without being taught. Personality retainment, somehow there's an information exchange that is picked up on, or a body of knowledge. I'd have to check where it is, but even Eileen Garrett, again, she's behind my back, she's just over my shoulder, watching over on me. I'm sure she said in one of her autobiographies at the end that she was challenged with the idea that she was actually contacting the dead, as opposed to picking up on information that's out there in a clairvoyance way from living individuals or what existed. And that's what made her so unique as a medium and an entrepreneur in many ways. She's pumping so much money into supporting people and challenging her own beliefs and experiences, and critically looking through, am I really contacting the dead? Does that actually happen? Or is it coming from something else? And it's making me even believe initially that that's what's going on. So I'm more in favor of the idea that personality gets retained rather than, like we are now, there's some sort of conscious awareness beyond bodily death. But my whole career, my work is on looking at research in this, how good it is, how robust it is, from historical reviews through to experiments, which is great if anyone can come up with ideas of an experiment that would lean towards this. I sort of sit in the middle, that I like the idea that memory, information might survive, that somehow could be picked up on in some way. So I like the idea. That's it. I like the idea. I'll entertain it. I really don't know. Some people have even said, where do you stand with all of this? And ultimately, if someone came up with an incredible study that showed, look, telepathy, ESP is not a thing. This is a robust study, look. And if it really was, it doesn't influence me in the slightest. The whole point, I think, is that we're trying to find stuff like that. I've heard people say over time, if parapsychology does its job right, it disappears, because all of these things that we're studying integrate into other areas of sciences once we understand their mechanisms. And I'd still be a psychologist, I'd still be dealing with these kinds of experiences, but we'd know a mechanism for it. So I really don't mind either way, whether these things are happening in the way that people might think they are or not, that they're happening in some sort of psychological processes. And some physicists believe that physics has got a lot to say about these experiences. Bernard Carr thinks that a lot of these experiences are more a matter of physics than they are of psychology. So yeah, long-winded answer, but personality more than conscious awareness.
Yeah.
Mm.
I just want to add that, just a thought that I'm sure has been touched on many conversations and new thinking aloud, that the current scientific way of studying information perhaps can't fully account for all of what these kind of phenomena perhaps express. That's just one little comment. And I do have a suggestion for you for research, Cal, or maybe you know of studies about announcing dreams because I personally had three of them in my life where my brother and his wife's children came to me before the mother knew she was pregnant. I knew what they looked like, their sex, their personality, who they looked like in the family. So when I met the baby, I felt like I was just meeting them again, not for the first time. And to me, that also does show that there's something before we come into this form of a body. So I don't know if you're aware of any. Of course, there's Ian Stevenson's great research and others about children remembering their past lives, but are you familiar with any research around gathering that kind of information, or perhaps that could be something to explore?
I think that's something to explore. I
Yeah,
think so.
great.
Let me jump back to what you were describing earlier as your work on as chair, I think you indicated, of the Survival Research Committee. Now, you use the term SPR many times. I don't know that all of our viewers know that means Society for Psychical Research. That's PSYCHICAL, founded in 1882 in London, involving many of the most prominent members of British society right from the beginning. But the question I'd like you to talk about is for people who might be considering a career in parapsychology or even considering enrolling in the new parapsychology degree programs at the California Institute for Human Science, what can they expect and what kind of resources will be available for them?
Oh, good question. So when I'm speaking with my students at the University of Northampton, I'm now working for the Californian Institute for Human Science as well. I do guest lecturing here and there, but I'm working between these two places now. I always talk about, just if we bring it back to just the BPS, the British Psychological Society, and then there's the APA, the American Psychological Association. I say to the students, hands up, has everyone got a student membership now? And I'm getting less and less. I said, come on, you're students, you've got access to a very cheap membership here. This is an organization that will give you, with your degree, your professional status if you want to work as a psychologist. You get, a license for when you want to become a sports psychologist, educational psychologist, clinical psychologist, occupational psychologist. This is the thing that's going to help you and have links to all your continued professional development, all the conferences, bringing together all the latest research. If you're not going down those routes, like myself, I'm a chartered psychologist with the British Psychological Society, and I'm a fellow of that organization as well, which I'm very, delighted to be a part of that, a very prestigious position. And it recognizes your standing in psychology and helps you through the door with different things, and it also regulates your practice and your ethics and your code of conduct. So now back to the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research, as you say, founded in 1882. It was a group of scholars from Trinity College at Cambridge, got together, and it's based in London. It's still going to this day. So we have particularly the General Grants Committee and the Survival Research Committee are the main two places we go to for funding. We've just had the 1st of June is usually the deadline for the bigger grants. And I think this month we've been inundated. We've just had a council meeting. We've just had a big conversation about the latest president changeover as well, which is very exciting. So there'll be more news about that as to who the next president of the SPR is. I already know. And there are these grants that we've got, and at the moment we're just going to be sifting through what's going on there. But they're really big now. We've had some recent donations. There was already, a nice stream of grants coming in and going out. But at the moment, the Survival Research Committee usually gave grants up to about, at a push after June the 1st, about 6,000 to 7,000 per person at most. Now we can go up to £15,000 a year on some of these grants. Now, these are really good in terms of when you think of as an undergraduate, a master's student, a doctoral student, you are doing some sort of dissertation, thesis. And if you're doing it on parapsychology and you're spending your own time going out and doing the data collection and so forth, there are probably many of these that just go missing. We've got unaccounted for studies that, because they've never been published, they've never been presented at a conference, we don't know about them as well. But think about a grant. these grants need to be applied for. That these organizations like the SPR need to be giving them out. We want people to have the money, and we want to support the research and get people through them. And in doing so, we want people to know what you're doing as well. For many of my students, they've been supported by, we call it, because it's a few thousand. You know, you talk about science getting research funding, it goes into the hundreds of thousands, some really big areas of science. This is seed corn funding. But it really snowballs because it funds, you know, the first bit of your project, the first year, then the second and third, and sees you all the way through to completion. If you keep going back to the funders and saying, this is what I've done now, and I've presented to you, and I've prepared a paper that's going through peer review, your funders are going to be very happy with that because their name's on it. They're scratching your back, you're scratching that. This is how academia works. This is how funding works. It gets you through your degree programs. It gets you networking and presenting at conferences. It starts to build your CV. It's meaning that you've got membership to things. If you're not joining as a member of things like the SPR, the BPS, the APA, then everyone else will have that same attitude. And those organizations won't be there if everybody else had the same attitude. If you're part of a research organization, a psychologist, a biologist, a physicist, you name it, these organizations are there to support your community, regulate your practice, that ethics and the code of conduct, and what you're doing, and also look at what the latest research is doing and support it, nurture it, and take it to the next step. So yeah, with the Society for Psychical Research, it's a very strong organization. We are still going in this year of 2025. We've got the General Grants Committee for any kinds of parapsychology related studies. But if you've got a study that is related to survival, anything from archiving work, if you're more kind of you're working in library studies, but parapsychology is your thing, or you're a historian, there could be stuff for that. We've done funded projects for archiving and bookbinding on things to do with survival. But those empirical studies, either everything from a case study to lab studies, we want to hear what you're doing. We want you to fill in grant forms. The good thing about the Survival Research Committee, besides this 1st of June deadline for the big grants, every single month throughout the year, you can apply to the Survival Research Committee of the Society for Psychical Research of a grant of up to £1,000. So again, little bits of funding, but if it helps you just keep going, getting through the door of what you need to be doing, we're there to help and support you. And there are many other organizations as well that have, if you keep looking into them, if you're part of a university, there might be grants and scholarships they offer. The Parapsychological Association has travel grants, the Bob Morris travel grant. One of my students just got that, and a couple of others as well. The Parapsychology Foundation had some really useful grants when they were very, very active. They're still going them. Alex Tanner's Foundation as well offer grants. There's even a very small Alex Tanner Scholarship Award, which is a very nice $500 and pat on the back and helps you with books and supports you with some of your academic writing. So the money's out there and it needs to be spent. Don't think that it's for the select few or, you know, you're never going to get it. If you don't write that application, if you don't throw your hat in the ring, you never know. And we're here to support that. If you're working in this area, we'd like to read your proposal. You don't have to send it off straight away. Send it to one of us and say, can you give me some feedback? Is this looking good? You know, am I going in the right direction? We're more than happy to look at that before you submit it. So please don't think that there's no funding, you're going to struggle getting through it, you can't complete your research or whatever it is. They're there for you.
Fantastic.
There you go.
Can you say anything else about the program at the California Institute?
Yeah, so I know we've got people on the books. People are already in and certainly working along the way with the Masters of Arts concentration, Psychology, Master of Arts, concentration Parapsychology. Some people have even started the remote viewing unit. And there are others, Parapsychology, the Introduction to Parapsychology, from the schedule we're looking at, should be starting in July. Now, there are other things as well, because this is part of a core psychology masters. There are some core elements of psychology that people are already doing. There are also conditional research methods units that they'll be doing as well. But Introduction to Parapsychology should be starting in July. We also have a clinical parapsychology unit, which is going to be going through approval soon. Two that are being sent off for approval this next week is practical applications of psi. Well, let's backtrack. I said clinical parapsychology. So what's that? Anomalistic psychology, all those conventional things that might lead to someone thinking that they're having a paranormal experience. Parapsychology takes that into consideration, but we're interested in what's left, what doesn't fit the bill. Clinical psychology, let's take that as read. Someone believes they've had one of these experiences. So what are the health implications? What impact do these experiences have on our lives? What purpose do they serve? We talked about need serving. What purpose do these experiences serve? And how do we deal with people that have had these experiences in a counseling setting? How do people deal with these experiences when they've gone through a bereavement? And what impact do they have on our lives when you have one of those experiences? Synchronistic experiences and premonitions and things like that. And, it saved your life. You averted disaster and possible death. And what impact has that had on your life and thinking about life moving forward? So there's the clinical aspect. So there's a whole unit on that is in this through to PhD level as well. Practical applications of Psi, which I very much hope will be a unit that Jeff and I tag team on a lot. We'll be looking at how do any of these elements of ESP and PK apply to the real world setting and literally are practically applied. How has the military used this? There's a history to that, so there'll be a class on that. There's 10 weeks to every unit, so there'll be a class on that. I've certainly taught on before, and it's going to be worked into this, the policing. So policing and criminal investigation and using Psi and perhaps where it's gone into the courtroom. Business and finance, sometimes predictions in the stock market, using your intuition in day-to-day life and business. It will be involving all those kinds of things, practically applying Psi. And I've been looking in some of the older books that are fascinating, where they've labeled themselves executive ESP to do with business that's overlap to ESP. History of psychical research, that's already written. Nancy Zingroni has written that. That unit is already in for approval. So even though I give the introduction to parapsychology unit, which will give a bit of a summary of the SPR and the Rhine Revolution, Dr. Zingroni will go into that in a lot more detail in her 10 weeks. She'll be giving a very detailed history of the progression of the history of psychical research. I have a unit as well on the survival of bodily death. So it's all 10 weeks of dealing with the survival hypothesis and what we mean by survival. We reached out also to Dr. Donna Thomas, who is based at the University of Lancashire. It's just changed its name from the University of Central Lancashire, which it's been for years, UCLan. It's now the University of Lancashire. She deals with childhood anomalous experiences. So I said, I'd love it if you could work this into a 10-week unit. So she's coming on board. And when Jeff and I started to do this, we reached out to a number of parapsychologists worldwide for suggestions of different units. And we've got a number of CVs and names on the books to bring people in, because not only do we have people that we need to deliver units, but ultimately at the end of the master's or at the end of the PhD, after you've done a set number of these units and research methods and core modules that you need that have got those core psychology elements, but you've added parapsychology specialization, it will end with a dissertation. It will end with a thesis. And with that, you will have a supervisor and you will need or supervisory team, and you'll be helped through that whole process. And I think for the masters, that might be a 1-year thing. For the PhD, I think with the timeline that we have, it's 2 or 3 years that it'll be, because it's a more condensed one than we might have in the UK. In the UK, you do an 80,000 word thesis for a PhD. These are different because we've got a number of modules capped off with a thesis, but still, that's where I go back to the whole thing of funding. Think ahead. What do you ultimately want to do as a research project in this area? You're not alone. The funding's out there to do something like this. There's Jeff as a supervisor and me, and there's going to be a number of other people on board as well. But we're moving along. CIHS is already becoming very strong for parapsychology. Units are being approved. Every week, things are changing. I've got loads of stuff to do next week that's all CIHS related, and they're approving things on the go right now. The course is already running. Applications are already coming in. We're just capping off these modules, these units. They're being taught for the very first time. So your experiences, your feedback are all going to help shape these as they move forward. And you're the first generation of students doing parapsychology going through CIHS like this. So we're very proud and privileged to have you on board if you want to kind of take that step and jump in. But if you're worried about support and how this helps in your career progression or the application, anything at all, any questions you have, we are here to help. Don't think you're alone or it's just a big daunting task. You really need to weigh up the pros and cons of what you want to do. Speak to us from our own experiences of what we've had, and we'll guide you in all the things that could happen along the way. We're here to help.
Beautifully put. And if any of our viewers are thinking of possibly enrolling in such a program, please feel free to reach out through New Thinking Aloud if you like. To me or to Cal, we are the two co-directors of Parapsychology Education at the California Institute for Human Science. Now we have a very personal question from a viewer named John who said, I had a nightmare of planes crashing the morning of September 11th, 2001, undoubtedly, before everything happened. The dream unnerved me, and I went to school, and the events happened. Why did this happen? And John adds, I've had no major dreams since then. Is there anything that you can say that would be helpful to a person like John?
I think some experiences that people have can initially be scary. I know, let's hold on to this, John. We'll come back to it. You've had this kind of experience. Let me just compare it with after death communication experiences where people see an apparition perhaps of a loved one, and in the minority of cases, they find it really scary. And then in later on thinking about it, that they start to integrate it into their thinking and what they already know, their childhood education, their peers, and how this fits into your worldviews, and reassess it. And sometimes that negative can turn into a positive over time as they start to try and fit this into their daily lives and try and make sense of that experience. Precognitions and certainly images of disaster, I always think when we think of any parapsychological experience, they are going to be the most frightening. Even with near-death experiences, they tend to be very pleasant experiences. There's only a minority of those that seem to be very scary, but even then, they seem to make people kind of dabble with their own views on death anxiety. These experiences, I think, can be very daunting in the kinds of experience you've had of absolute disaster. But for those that were closer to home with 9/11 and they will be traveling into the city or working in the trade centers, that there were quite a few people that came forward that had these experiences. There's a really good talk through the Parapsychology Foundation's YouTube channel that's still going with Dr. Richard Broughton called Emotion and ESP. And he talks about the statistics and some of the day-to-day accounts, which you, John, will probably find interesting. He gives some examples of people's premonitions of 9/11. But the statistics are fascinating with people that on a day-to-day basis would have gone into the World Trade Centers, but on that day, before anything happened, the statistics are lower than usual. Studies like this have been done since the 1950s. A researcher called Cox, who looked at train commuters and took into account even days when it would be raining, and perhaps the numbers of ticket sales would be lower because they've stayed at home or they've driven in, they've carpooled and gone with someone else and got a lift instead of making the trek to the train station. Even taking that into account, on days of train collisions and fatalities, the statistics were lower of people commuting that day, suggesting somehow they'd had an intuition, a hunch to do something else, and it's averted disaster. That's really interesting, especially when it's not a distinct vision, but you've had one and it's quite scary, but you've not had one since. I think go and look. My first suggestion, go and watch that video by Richard Broughton, Emotion and ESP. He gave it to the Parapsychology Foundation, and listen to some other people's accounts that are similar to your own, and just have a think about how that actually makes you feel with the fact that you are not alone. This is not unique to you. You're not unwell in having these experiences. They're very common for people to have them. This was a global consciousness thing as well. 9/11 went all around the world and it affected many people. It was just such a traumatic event, and that was an understatement. The world was affected by what happened with this. And so to have something like that before it happened, and it's very personable to you, of course, is going to be very impactful. But we're a long time away from that now. Go back and look at this lecture on ESP and emotion, the other people in your boat that had similar experiences as well, and get Dr. Richard Broughton's take on this as well. And then perhaps come back to us, send me an email or something, and how you felt after that, reflecting on it. We've also got some really good suggestions on researchers like Keith Hearn, his book that really got him into this. His interest started with a premonition that was very personable to him, and how that progressed him in life and his own career forward as well. So start with a reflection on other experiences and ones that are absolutely on that exact same event and how that makes you feel. And let's move forward from there.
Great advice. How can one get in touch with you, Cal? I don't know if you want to put your email out to everybody, or do you have a website or an email with?
I've got all sorts, and
Okay.
since we're talking about CIHS a
CIHS,
lot,
that makes
and
sense.
my Northampton email is already bogged down with all sorts going on and the amount of doctoral students that I've got. I'll give you the CIHS email. So my full name, it's not common in the United States. My full name is Callum, which I have on my papers and my books. So that's CALLUM, and then it's underscore Cooper at cihs.edu. So edu is common for all the academic institutions in the United States. In the UK, we have .ac.uk. So it's Callum underscore Cooper at cihs.edu. It's the same for Jeff's as well. He's Jeffrey underscore Mishlove at cihs.edu. So you can get in contact with me there. I do have a website, which is callumecooper.com. And that links to my books and things that I've done. Website needs a bit of an update because the pictures and stuff are old and stuff like that. But I'm very much active on there. All emails through that come to me as well. I even have people that I like it getting posts now and then. People send posts to the University of Northampton. I sometimes get packages of a book someone's enjoyed. Sometimes they've sent me a book that they want me to read as well, or just a letter of a personal experience or things like that. So I still get snail mail as well. So any of those should get you to me. I've got different social medias that are all linked through my website as well.
There is a question from a person's YouTube name, which is Witchy Woman, and they ask, are there volunteer free studies for psychic mediums going on right now to physically test, monitor, or study the experience of psychic mediums real time in the US or UK, are able to be done virtually? And before you answer, Cal, I just want to share a thought that's coming to me is that, Jeff, with New Thinking Aloud, we cover these topics from all different angles, and it makes me realize that I imagine that many of our viewers and listeners are experiencers and probably even what Sean Esbjorn Hargan calls super experiencers. And maybe something to think about if it's never been done is how could we connect people who are listening who either want to be studied or want to know about maybe studies going on. That's maybe my own follow-up question. So her question really, or his question, their question is about studies for psychic mediums, if you're aware of anything happening.
I do
Not
hear from a lot of viewers who say, "Study me. I'm available. I have all kinds of phenomenon going on. Why can't somebody study me?"
Yeah, yeah. And it's probably true that they're having all sorts of experiences and they want somebody to know about what's happening, kind of like with Ted Owens. But anyway, Cal, the question from Witchy Woman, how would you like to respond to that?
in a traditional way, just like Jeff said. It used to be a big thing, I suppose. The early doors of parapsychology labs around the Rhine era, people wandering in and saying they've got experiences or abilities. I think they were more open to testing. I think that started to become an issue when Project Alpha came about. And that was with James Randi and these two young trained magicians by him, and the controversy that caused with the Stanford Research Institute. And so since then, we've been very cautious. I mean, ultimately, when someone comes to us at any university or institute, and I've already mentioned at the start of this how many there are in the UK, our main question is why? What do you need out of this? Why you? People think that parapsychology is studying a single psychic all the time, the likes of, Nina Kalaganas and Uri Gellers and people like that. We're not. We honestly aren't. Our day-to-day studies are of the general public. If psi's out there, then it should exist within the general population, and so we test the general population. But when I defined parapsychology, I said experiences and or abilities that appear. So that ability is still within our remit, but we just are very cautious when it comes to testing because of what the person wants out of it. They're going to run to the media and say they've been tested by the CIHS or the University of Northampton, and therefore, I'm an accredited medium or psychic because I have been tested. It doesn't matter whether you're successful or a failure. You can just say I was tested, and it sounds more legitimate. And that becomes a problem for the media and that institution's reputation and so forth because of any potential backlashes. But that's not closing the door to this. We do still test the claims. We just have to do a lot of follow-ups. It is not an easy or quick route through the universities. But if you want to test your abilities or look at training things, I'm probably going about this the wrong way, but my initial thoughts that come to me are people come from all over the world to go to Stansted Hall, which is the Arthur Findlay College for psychic science. So it's on the outskirts of London. People go there to train. It's beautiful, grand building, and they train through the Spiritualist National Union to develop their mediumship or whatever other abilities they have. The College of Psychic Studies in London, which is just across the road from the Natural History Museum, it's where Eileen Garrett lived before she emigrated to the United States. She lived a floor below Harry Price, who rented his lab on the top floor for next to nothing. I think his wife helped out with a lot of that. Their entire building is an archive, and they do classes, and I think they do a lot of online things as well. To support development in psychic abilities and so forth. So their classes might be more useful because of the distant learning aspect to it. I think start with that. But again, if there's a particular institution that's close to you, or you feel that you just want these people to hear you out, then again, there's no harm in dropping an email, explaining your backstory, what it is that you say that you have and how your experiences play out, and how you even see these being tested. What are the conditions in which you can display these abilities, in terms of then how the researcher could then turn that into a lab study that meets those demands but still adds control as well, so that can then become sort of project with you and work on those moving forward. But College of Psychic Studies or the Arthur Findlay College, I think, is the first protocol. See if any of that is of interest. If it's not, I understand you're probably more thinking the researchers at the universities and lab tests. But this is why we're cautious, and there's nothing really thrown about a current Eurogala or anything like that, because we're not. We're just not. We're just, that caution went up, but we're not closed down to it.
There's also the Windbridge
Oh,
Institute.
of course. Sorry. Yes.
The
Yes.
Windbridge Institute in the United States.
Sorry, Julie. Sorry, Mark.
They do test mediums, and they even have, I don't know if it's still going on, a program for certifying mediums. And there is another foundation here in the US, the Forever Family Foundation, does testing of mediums.
Bob Ginsberg, lovely guy.
Yes, and you will find interviews on the New Thinking Aloud channel with Robert Ginsberg, who's the president of the Forever Family Foundation, talking about their work, as well as with Judy Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi of the Windbridge Foundation. They've both been interviewed on this channel talking about their work as well. And I might add, for many viewers don't realize, we have, and you can find it if you go to our page on YouTube, the homepage for New Thinking Aloud, you can link to our listings, which lists every single program that we've released. There are over 2,000, but it's not as if they're mysterious. They're listed by guests by both topic and alphabetical order. And if you do a search, it's an enormous document because we have over 2,000 videos now up on the channel, but you can search through it to find whatever you want. It's an enormous wealth of information.
Yeah, it's
If I
almost,
can, in
almost a
putting the,
university unto itself without necessarily the degree. Yeah. But I know many people do reference those in academia. Go ahead, Cal.
I was just going to say, in putting these units together recently, people might be thinking, well, what's standard reading or accessible textbooks? I've got a pile here because I've been sat here throughout the weeks working on them. So my good friend in the UK, this is probably one of the latest textbooks by Routledge, Dark Cognition by David Vernon. It works as a really good parapsychology textbook, evidence for psi, its implications for consciousness. Each chapter is standalone with dealing with things like telepathy and remote viewing and things like that. So that came out in the exact same year that Sage did one as well, called The Psychology of the Paranormal, by David Marks as well. But we've been pushing David Vernon's. He was also one of the journal, he was back as journal editor for the Society for Psychical Research. One that's become quite old now, but still accessible, John Beloff's Parapsychology, A Concise History. That's a really, really good one. This is hefty, and you can get it as an ebook as well. Look at the size of it. But this is Parapsychology, a handbook for the 21st century. It's heavily loaded. It's got so much information. If you're not keen on it being academic academically heavy, this might not be the one for you, but if you are that way inclined, certainly then is the book for you. And then these two final ones I mentioned at the start, Richard's book, Parapsychology, The Controversial Science. This is such a fun read. Now, it's out of print, but you'll find it on eBay and Abbey Books and stuff secondhand. What's so good about this, just like Sue Blackmore's book, Parapsychologists in Search of the Light, it acts as a textbook because it explains things in parapsychology to you, but it's a personal journey. It's Richard's journey of working in parapsychology, where he started and where he got to by 1991. So I always recommend this and make Richard blush and then annoy him by saying you've got to write more. You need to get this book out so it's constantly out. The one we always gravitate to, and I've just contacted Harvey J. Owen to say, are you going to do a 6th edition? I like this the most still as a textbook because each chapter ends with possible essay questions. It's full of citations as well. And each chapter works as great reading if you're doing a week by week module on this. So let's say in week 1, we're going to talk about mediumship. Well, then my suggestion is read the chapter on mediumship. And then for that hour, we're going to discuss it and have a class on it. And then we'll look at some possible group tasks or talk about the questions that are in there. So chapter by chapter ends with tasks and scenarios. And it's really well up to date. By 2007, so there's things to update and stuff, but this 5th edition still works really well. So it's an introduction to parapsychology by Harvey J. Owen and Caroline Watt. So you've got some book suggestions to go on for a general overview of parapsychology.
Well, thank you so much, Cal, and thank you, Emmy. We're at the end of our live stream now, but it has been a real pleasure. And of course, I want to thank all of our viewers for being with us because naturally, you are the reason that we are here.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure. There's a lot more questions coming in than we can address. So, Cal, hopefully we can have you back again in the future. And I'm looking forward to your interviews. I know you've already done some as a guest host. I'm looking forward to more of your interviews on New Thinking Aloud as well and getting to work alongside you.
Likewise, it's good to be here and it's so good to see you both. And thank you for the chat over the past hour and a half. I've really enjoyed it.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.